Alrighty, very happy to be welcoming back for his second appearance on Speaking of Data, Mark Peco. We're going to talk about dimensional modeling today, and that includes a course that you're going to be teaching at our TDWI Orlando conference coming up in November. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time out to join me again here. Happy to be talking with you again. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. Great to be back with you again.
Yeah, great. So Mark, I know we're going to get into the topic of the dimensional modeling piece here, but would you mind for our audience just giving a brief background about yourself, your expertise, and maybe your involvement in TDWI?
Sure, I'd love to do that. So I live in the Toronto area, spent most of my life here in Canada. But as a background, I'm an engineer by education. So I have a master's in mechanical engineering, and data has been the common theme through my entire career. And I've learned a lot that is really relevant to the topic of today around how data is collected, used, and analyzed and deployed. I've been associated with TWI and their faculty since the early 2000s. Seems like a blink of an eye, but it's almost been 2 decades now. Um, I do consulting, I do course development, and I do general research to keep current. So that's a bit about me, and we'd love to get started with the conversation.
Well, that's fantastic, and yeah, we do appreciate your loyalty to TDWI, and I think you've done such a fantastic job for us. It's only it only makes sense that the relationship continues to move forward, and you're a valuable piece of our faculty. So I do appreciate that. And you can catch Mark. He's teaching several classes, but the one that we're going to be talking about today is the dimensional modeling class at TDWI Orlando. So let's get right into it. I think a baseline is nice to start with for this conversation because dimensional data models may not be something that everyone is listening is aware of. So Mark, would you be so kind as to kind of provide us with a general introduction to dimensional data models from a non-technical point of view?
Sure. Think of data models in general as a way to organize and structure different kinds of data for different kinds of purposes. Specifically, dimensional models, which have their roots back into the 1990s, help us organize specific types of data around, I'm going to say, really around measurement data that helps us measure processes and business activities in a way we can analyze and report on measurement data. So it's specifically organized around the measurement problem and the kinds of data we use for business measurements, which I'll get into in a few minutes.
Okay. Okay. So would you be able to maybe give me like an example of what that would look like potentially within a organization? I'm trying to wrap my head around it a little bit.
Okay. If we kind of compare it to the general purpose relational model, we think of relational models are organized around the things of interest to us. And those things are persons, places, and things. We organize the data around the things, not what we're going to use the data for. When we organize data in a dimensional model, we separate the types of elements we need to measure something, and there's two pieces of that puzzle. There are something called facts and something called dimensions. Facts quantify a property, like say process throughput, process efficiency, process cost, process reliability. These are measurements that we can capture, and we want to put context around the measurements with descriptions. So we could be measuring the process throughput on a specific day for a specific customer with a specific product in mind. And so we think about organizing the data and breaking it apart into how it's going to be used, which is now giving purpose to the data, which is measurement plus context gives me information. Where relational models are simply a generic way to organize data to serve a variety of purposes, where dimensional models are designed to serve the measurement and analytics process.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That was very helpful for me. So then, given the flexibility of relational data models, what do dimensional models offer as an alternative?
I think it compares something as very general purpose versus something as very specific. So you could do all the things we do in dimensional models, you could do in relational models, but with much more effort. So we can store measurements, we can store descriptive information in relational databases, but dimensional models are optimized to make it less effort to get at the data. So it's more organized around the purpose to make it more specific to our data collection, interpretation, and really analysis type function. So it makes analysts more productive because the data is organized around the problems they're trying to solve or around the processes they're trying to improve. It's less generic and more specific. And because of that, it gives several advantages.
That's very interesting. Could you perhaps maybe explain the difference between operational and analytical data use cases?
Sure. So we think about, say you're running a process, you're managing a call center, you're managing a production line, you're managing an administrative process. Typically, the kinds of questions managers get asked in those things are, who did this? When did it happen? Where did it happen? So the questions are usually very descriptive with answers. Where that's operational data. It's around what's going on now, who's doing it, when's it happening, where's it taking place. Analytical data is about counting things, measuring things, and looking at trends and patterns over longer time periods. Because we're looking to say, how do I find an outlier? How do I find something unusual? How do I measure to see if I'm on target? How do I know if I'm meeting my objectives or not? So analytical data is organized through the lens of quantifying properties with those measurements, where operational data is more focused around events, specific things going on, but it's much more descriptive and much less quantitative or measurement oriented.
Okay. So then something that you mentioned earlier was facts and dimensions. What exactly are those things, and how do they come into play here?
Okay, so in both cases, facts and dimensions are simply different types of data. So if we start off with data we've collected from a process, and now we want to understand how that process is behaving, what's it costing us, how much we're getting through it, how consistent is it, et cetera. So there's certain properties I want to measure. So if I think about putting a gauge or an instrument to measure something in a process, that is now defining what we're going to call a fact. A fact is a measurement construct that's recorded at a point in time. But at that level, it's just a number. Now, to put meaning and context around that fact so I can interpret it, I have to have what are called dimensions. Dimensions give me context. So if I record something, the number 10, and I say that is a quality count at a point in time for a given product, for a given customer, I can now put context around that measurement. Those are my dimensions. So think of returning quantitative data plus descriptive data, combining them, and we're creating information from that. And that information should be used to answer process managers' questions about where they want to take improvements, how they want to adjust, are they on target or not. So think of it as simply the two building blocks of a measurement output, which is a fact, which is a measurement, and a dimension, which is a context or a category to put meaning around the fact. The fundamental goal here is to improve processes or improve business performance. So we think about, we all need measurements to help guide our thinking. So by combining facts with dimensions, we can answer a lot of questions that business managers are going to have around how am I doing. So there's a strong link between the dimensional model and how it's organized to support a measurement process, which is part of a, say, process improvement, business performance management type initiative to quantify behaviors, quantify activities, and quantify results. So these are definitely related. It's all part of the spectrum.
Okay, great. So then I guess the next question I have is, when would dimensional models not be recommended?
Okay, that's a good question because they're not general purpose. They're specifically around the analytical process or the measurement process. If we're trying to build a generic general purpose solution with what I'm going to call structured data, and structured data is data we can put into a table, a relational model is probably a more appropriate way. So if we're building an operational system, an order entry system, something to track invoices, something to track operational activities, relational databases are really how we support transactions, how we enter orders, record financial results. So I would not use a dimensional model to manage transactions or to manage operational activities. I would use them to analyze the results of activities, not the recording of the activities.
Okay, that makes some sense to me now.
Okay.
I'm learning along with with the audience, I think here, Mark. This is so interesting. So thank you for breaking it down for me. I got a couple questions left, but one that rings true to me right now is, what would be some of the key challenges for like long-term success when using a dimensional model?
Okay, there are many challenges, and I think the big one I want to talk about is probably around integration. How do we, if we think about a dimensional model as a piece of a jigsaw puzzle that we're measuring a particular process? Well, a company has many processes. So how do we measure the impact of, say, employee morale on productivity or on process throughput or on financial results? Those are covering many processes. So if we're building a dimensional model per process, we have to have some way of joining these things together. Now, Ralph Kimball, who developed dimensional modeling back in the 1990s, talked about something called a conformed dimension. A conformed dimension, in other words, the calendar could be a standard dimension. My product hierarchy could be a dimension. My sales territory could be a dimension. If I look at the ones that are in common and I have the discipline to standardize on them and share them across the teams, then I can join multiple models together to look at the impact of the things I mentioned, things like low morale, on productivity, on customer satisfaction, on profitability, because these are all linked now through something in common. That something in common is called a conformed dimension. However, conformed dimensions don't magically fall to the air. They take discipline to follow. We have to agree what they are across the organization, but as project teams build new models, they need the discipline to follow existing standards and conformity. And that lack of discipline can lead to chaos. So we need to have some way of linking these together. Otherwise, we're going to build what are called independent models where we really can't analyze across them. And that defeats the purpose of really getting insights at the company level. So I would say this is the biggest challenge. I mean, there are many other ones, but that's the most important one to consider is the conformity and standardization of something in common, which I would call a conformed dimension. So we share a common calendar, a common sales organization structure, a common product hierarchy. And if we don't have these in common, I can't analyze across them, and I'm really got a bunch of little islands.
Quick follow-up there, Mark. I'm curious, this seems like this might be relatively commonplace, but can you maybe share like how many organizations or like a percentage of organizations that are using these dimensional models and perhaps how many they might be using on average?
That's a really interesting question. In my experience, I've been teaching for TDWI now here for pushing 20 years. And there's been a renaissance, in my view, of the demand for courses in this topic in the last, maybe even since COVID, since in the last 3 to 4 years. I think we fell into a malaise that this modeling didn't matter. We had reporting tools that said we could simply consume data. Modeling is not going to buy you any results. And I think people have realized that modeling is the basis for long-term sustainability. And so my view is it's gone through waves of popularity. And I think now we're in the uptick that many companies are embracing the need to do this.
Hmm.
So I can't put a number to it. I would say it's a very common approach. Companies have struggled and failed because they lack the discipline to integrate and they had a mess on their hands. And now they're trying to sometimes breathe life into it to say we have to go back and rethink this and put in standards in place. So I would say since the 90s until now, it's very common. And there's been many pockets of success and probably an equal number of failures. And the failures are due to a lack of resources, commitment, and maturity in some cases. So I think it's a pretty popular approach, but again, there are many successes, but there's also an equal number of stories probably where they're less than successful because of that.
Interesting. A last follow-up question, because I want to get into maybe a preview of the course that you're going to be teaching on this in TDWI Orlando, but who would be in charge of this in an organization? Is this a domain-specific aspect?
That is a very interesting question because I think it's shifting over time. I think at one time in the early days, I'm going back now into the early days in the 1990s, early 2000s, it was probably more of an IT-led function. As things have matured and people have become more into business ownership around process improvement, business performance management, we now have chief data officers, chief analytics officers. We have things that are more, what's the right word here, across disciplines, across departments. So I think there's different people in companies. It's not a technical problem. this is a business problem that we want to standardize on how we want to analyze or group our data. So I would think that it's probably from the world of a chief data officer. I think data governance plays a big role here.
Hmm.
So I taught a class at a conference in San Diego last week, and a lot of people are struggling because they lack data governance.
Right.
Data governance is the big enabler for enabling these standards. So, and data governance is a relatively, I want to say new discipline, but over the last 15 years, it's a newer discipline than dimensional modeling is. So I think there's a linkage here between being able to conform to standards, and different companies have different people that do it, but
Hmm.
essentially it's a team sport. We have to follow the rules to share things with each other. So that's the objective I would have.
That was a great one. Okay, so I do want to get into the course that is going to be available for those listening here. You can go to our website, tdwi.org, click on our events tab, and find the full agenda for Orlando. Mark is teaching 3 different courses, and I'll put a link in the description here so that people can go and click on that and explore more. But the Friday class is the one on dimensional modeling, Mark. So I was hoping maybe you can give a preview as to what might be discussed and potentially learned by those attending.
Sure. The class is by definition, it's a primer, which means it's an introductory course. And people that take the course are somewhat surprised that we spent half of our time on understanding the business context and purpose and requirements for data. People think that data modeling is a technical process of design only. In my view, that is important, but it's only part of the puzzle. So in the course I'm teaching in Orlando, we'll look at the analysis, which is context, purpose, and scope of data, requirements of data, i.e., what business questions I want to get answered, which drive designs. So it'll look at a holistic approach that sometimes different people participate in these in a company. It's not always done by the same group, but it's a holistic process. And we find out that sometimes companies struggle in being able to tie these processes together. We'll do hands-on exercises, not with software, but with a pen and paper, or uh, we'll go through the life cycle of a dimensional model from a problem to requirements to uh, different levels of design, and then students can critique each other. I'll critique them, I'll help them, guide them, and they can share their results and practice this with a fictitious little scenario in a classroom, but it lets you see the how things fit together in terms of their overall life cycle.
Well, that's fantastic, and I'm sure there's going to be an abundance of valuable information there. And we do see time and time again that when folks are able to have these kind of shared experiences in a classroom and have that peer-to-peer kind of review and exchange, it does provide a significant level of value there as well. So, all right, Mark, I'm going to let you go. I know you're busy. But I do really appreciate you coming on, talking to me again about this. And thanks for teaching me something. I just got a little miniature course. I think everyone else out there might have as well. So go ahead and follow up with Mark if you'd like to. And if you can't make it TDWI Orlando and you're interested in following up with Mark, Mark, can you give a way for people to reach out to you?
Sure. My email is my name with a dot. So it's mark.peco, P-E-C-O, @gmail.com. And I'd love to hear from you. So if you want to reach out and say hello, happy to communicate.
Terrific. Thanks again, Mark. Really appreciate your time. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.